Hi, this is Nathan Boone from the Indiana Farmers Union, and welcome to our second Tech Talk on record keeping, a really important and rascally topic. I am a food safety trainer with the Indiana Farmers Union, and we are a membership organization in Indiana trying to help family farmers. I'm pleased to welcome Tari Gary. She is here with us today to walk through record keeping, and I'll let her give her own introduction as to who she is and what she does. Tari, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Nathan. As Nathan said, my name is Tari. I am the Food Safety Outreach Coordinator at the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, and I work as a part of the Safe Produce Indiana program alongside the Indiana Department of Health and Purdue Extension. And our goal is to educate Hoosier produce growers about the FSMA produce safety rule and produce safety best practices. So my primary goal is outreach, and then I also assist Purdue Extension with produce safety education, and then the Indiana Department of Health leads regulatory enforcement for the FSMA produce safety rule in Indiana. So I'm excited to talk about this important topic today.
Tari, so why are we even doing this on record keeping? Why is this coming up for us to talk about?
So record keeping is really important. This is how farmers can show that they are in fact doing things that in order to comply with the FSMA produce safety rule. We always say if it's not documented, then it didn't happen. So this is really the main way that growers can prove this. And we've been on tons of farms throughout the state, and this is a consistent thing that we find that growers are lacking is in record keeping. A lot of times we see farms, they're doing the right thing, they're just not writing it down. And that sounds easy, but it can be very difficult to build that into your routine. So today we're just going to talk about exactly what is required in order to comply with the FSMA produce safety rule.
Thank you. So yeah, I recognize the same thing when I talk to growers around the state. There's two things. First of all, which records need to be kept, and then how do you actually keep them, in your own operation? And that's kind of a calculation you have to make. So let's go through the records that you are required, because there's a lot of records. You can get really confused on the internet finding lots of templates and record forms, and there's gap forms in this form, but this is it. We're talking about just the forms that you're required to keep if you're covered under FSMA. And this is for small growers, but if you have to be covered in order to be required to have to do all these, and we're going to walk through those. So let's start here. This document is going to be listed in the links below, so you can find this exact document to review it, because it does have the forms. But Tari, tell us about what this is. An 11-page PDF. Tell us about what this PDF is, and then we'll walk through it.
So this PDF is from the Produce Safety Alliance out of Cornell, and it's one of my favorite guidance documents because it's so to the point. It outlines exactly what records are required in order to comply with the FSMA produce safety rule. And like you just said, Nathan, this is bare minimum. So if you're doing something above and beyond, like organic certification or a third-party audit or something, you might need additional records, but this is just the bare minimum to comply with FSMA. So not every single document that we are going to talk about today is going to be needed on every farm. You just have to determine what is relevant to your farm based on what practices you're doing.
Okay, great. So I'm going to scroll down to the very first form, and we're going to kind of run through this one quickly because we did the tech talk earlier on the qualified exemption form. So go ahead and tell us about what is the qualified exemption template down here at the bottom.
So this qualified exemption template provides a place for you to record your sales. So your total produce sales, total food sales, and then what sales are going directly to qualified end users for your produce. So you can take a look at this document and read the text of the produce safety rule to see what is required. But I do encourage growers to check out our previous tech talk about qualified exemptions and what documents are required for qualified exemptions in Indiana. We go into a little bit more detail, and there are state-specific forms that growers will need to complete if they think they're qualified exempt.
Exactly. So the reason that this form is number one is because this is your on-ramp or your off-ramp. If you're qualified exempt and you're not covered under FSMA, this is the document that you have to do to prove it. Like when an inspector comes to your farm, you can't just say, I'm not covered. You have to show them, and this is the form. So this form's first for that reason. It kind of is a qualifier if you need to continue to do more record keeping. So let's go to the next. Let's assume that you are covered and you do have to do the record keeping. So let's move forward and go to the very first document here, Tari.
So Nathan, can you scroll back up just for a second on the
Sure.
first page? There is a little blurb that I just want to call attention to, and it's just this paragraph that says all records required by the produce safety rule must contain certain information outlined in that section. So every single record is going to need the name and location of the farm, actual values and observations obtained during monitoring, a description of the covered produce, so maybe the commodities that this pertains to, the location of the growing area or packing area, and the date and time of the activity documented. So as we go through these other templates and these other records that growers may keep, make sure you keep all of that in mind and really read that in detail and look at every document to make sure you include those things.
Okay, great. And I think the reason that's important, Tari, is that if you decide to modify the forms or you want to use your own form, you have to have this information in there. You can't omit some of these things. So the forms that we're going to show you below have all of these, but if you're going to modify them or change them, you have to keep these as the bare minimum. You can't just drop any of these areas, right?
That's a great point.
Okay. So let's go ahead and scroll down to the first record.
So the first record that growers are going to want to keep is personnel qualifications and training. So all of the worker training that you do, remember you need to train your workers upon hire, and then at least once annually they have to go through a refresher. So you want to make sure you keep a record of who was trained, when, what topics you covered, who the trainer was, training date, training time, all of the things that are included on that template and detailed in that blurb there.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Let's move to the second one, agricultural water.
So this is the most involved section of the produce safety rule when it comes to record keeping. There are several records that you'll want to keep in accordance with this water section. And like we've said in the trainings, water is one of those things that has been linked to a lot of outbreaks in the past. So that's why there are so many requirements when it comes to agricultural water. So the first record that you'll want to keep are the findings of the water system inspection that a farm should do at least once annually for all of your water sources. And once again, the details of exactly what you need to write are in this template and then also in the blurb to the left. So you want to write that down every year. Number two is the results of any water testing that you have done. So in most cases, or pretty much all cases, the lab that you take your water sample to will send those results to you as the grower. And you just need to keep those on file for the required amount of time. That way you can easily access those if you need them in the future. Number three is any scientific data or information that growers rely on to support the adequacy of the methods related to water treatment. So if you're treating your water with a sanitizer or things like that, you need to make sure you have any of that scientific data or info showing that that sanitizer will work. And that's reflected in that template below, the water treatment monitoring record. And it also meets the requirements of number 4, documentation of the results of water treatment monitoring carried out under section 112.43b. Water treatment monitoring records must be reviewed, dated, and signed by a supervisor or responsible party within a reasonable time. So that's one thing that's an important point too, is some of these records do require a review. So at the bottom of the template, it will say reviewed by. If it document says that, it needs to be reviewed. So make sure that someone is reviewing that. But once again, that water treatment monitoring record, it has things like time, water temperature, pH, turbidity, all of that, those monitoring things that you may do for water treatment.
Great.
Number 5, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, I just had a quick point. I wanted to go back to number 3, and I just wanted to clarify this thing of scientific data or information growers rely on. So wouldn't just the basic manufacturer information on their label or their material safety sheet or even their brochure or something for the product would say, you know, this is sanitizer for these purposes, that would be enough to have on hand?
Yes, and then also it might say that the sanitizer best performs at these pHs or at these concentrations, and those are also the things that you'll want to make sure that you're monitoring and recording.
Exactly. So you want to be using products according to their intended purposes and to their specifications. You just because you have a sanitizer doesn't mean that you might not be using it the way it's designed to be used. So you have to be using it according to how it's been engineered and concocted, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to clarify that they didn't have to go to the library and research the primary, research on the efficacy of a sanitizer. So, okay, sorry, go ahead. You were at number 5, I think.
Yes, so number 5 is any scientific data relied upon to support the microbial die-off rate between harvest and the end of storage or removal rate during activities such as washing, if used in accordance with the 112.45B1, 2. So that, if you want to scroll down, Nathan, there is a template for microbial die-off. Now, I'm not going to go into detail because that's a very complicated topic, but that is an option as far as corrective actions go. If you do get a high count from a high E. coli count from your water testing, if you do rely upon microbial die-off as a corrective action, you have to keep very detailed records showing that is in line with the produce safety rule. And then number 6 here talks about if you take any other corrective measures if you do have high E. coli counts. So anything else that you might be doing, like bleaching the well or fixing something, if you have to repair your wellhead, anything like that, you want to write all of that stuff down too. So you can say, yes, we identified that there was a problem with this high, and by having a high count, this is what we did about it. And then you also want to retest to show that fixed the problem. So make sure you're keeping all of those records as well.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if you have a problem water test, you want to show a corrective action and then a retest, and you want to see those numbers get better because that tells the story right there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The next water record that you will need is annual documentation of the results or certificates if you're using a public water system. So like we say in our Produce Safety Alliance trainings, these public water suppliers have to do certain testing and things. So if you're on public water, you don't necessarily have to do your own test on the farm, and you can just get a copy of those results from that water supplier, whether that's the city or whatever, and just keep those on file, and you can show that during your inspection. If you're using any alternative microbial water quality criteria, die-off rates, sampling frequencies, anything that's different than what is spelled out in the produce safety rule, you have to have scientific data supporting that and showing that that is a validated thing that you are using. And then any equivalent methods used in lieu of US EPA method 1603. So what that is that's the testing method that the lab is using in order to test your water for E. coli. And there is a fact sheet that lays out the equivalent testing methodologies that a lab could use in order to comply with the FSMA produce safety rule. And you'll just want to make sure you know what method they're using. They should be able to tell you, and it should be on that equivalent testing methodologies list.
Okay, so just a quick clarification on this number 8, like if someone is not using, like to say an off-the-shelf standard sanitizer that is widely recognized, they have to prove that it works. They can't just say, oh yeah, we use fairy dust. You have to back it up. So is that what you mean?
So this is more for testing your water. If a grower is using different water quality criteria, if they're testing it for something other than E. coli, or if they're using a different die-off rate than what the FDA outlined in the FSMA produce safety rule, or if they're sampling more frequently or less frequently, I'd say less frequently, they have to have scientific data to back up why they are doing that. So it's just giving them a little bit of wiggle room as a grower, that you don't necessarily have to do things this certain way, but it has to be scientifically valid. Most of the time, we just recommend that growers follow what is outlined in the produce safety rule. For example, test your water for E. coli. These are the criteria you want to meet, etc.
Okay, let's keep moving on. Let's get to the next one because I know this next one's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, so these next couple records are if you are using biological soil amendments of animal origin. So if you are using anything like composted manure, for example, or even bone meal, feather meal, fish emulsion, anything like that. You'll know if you've attended the produce safety launch training that that stuff, your best bet is to use a treated biological soil amendment of animal origin. So if you are treating your own compost on the farm, for example, you will need to keep records that you have followed a scientifically validated process to reduce or eliminate pathogens in that manure. So most of the time, this is going to involve monitoring and recording times, temperatures, and turnings to show that you followed that scientifically validated process. And once again, this needs to be reviewed, signed, and dated by a supervisor. So can't just say, oh yeah, that pile back there, yeah, that's compost. No, you want to make sure you have these records to back it up.
Okay, great. I'm going to keep
Yeah.
moving on to keep on our
If you're
timeline here, Terry. Sorry.
Okay, if you're using a biological soil amendment from a third party, you do need documentation for that as well from the supplier. So you need to have some type of letter or something saying that they did follow a scientifically validated process. And they also need to say that it was handled in a way to reduce that likelihood of contamination of that soil amendment. So anything of animal origin from a third-party supplier needs to have that documentation.
Okay, great, thanks.
And then this last section here is all about equipment, tools, buildings, and sanitation. The big thing here is make sure you are recording when you are cleaning and sanitizing equipment, what is being cleaned and sanitized, how, and that the person that is actually doing that activity is the one that signs off, that they are the one that cleaned that, and then that needs to be reviewed. So detailed there in that document.
Great.
This last section here, once again, is just kind of general information, general requirements for all records that you keep in accordance with the produce safety rule. So you can store these records off-site if you don't have space on your farm, but you have to be able to retrieve them within 24 hours of official request from the FDA or from the state. You can keep electronic records if that's something you want to do, but you can do paper, electronic, there is no requirement there. There are just some special considerations. If you do want to keep electronic records, you do have to keep them for a certain amount of time. So you may want to back those up in some way or something like that. The next requirement on here, or the next note, I guess, is that if you are keeping records for organic certification or a third-party audit, you don't have to duplicate records. You can just have one record that you show for your FSMA inspection and your organic certification audit. Just make sure that you have all the requirements that we've talked about today and detailed in this document. You have to keep records for at least 2 years past the date of when that record was created. So it can be a lot of paper, but you do have to keep it for at least 2 years. Records need to be kept as original records, true copies or electronic records. So you don't want a bunch of photocopies just laying around. And let's see here, we talked about you have to, they have to be retrievable within 24 hours. They have to be in a format that is accessible and legible. And then you'll notice at the bottom of all of these templates, there's a little confidential statement here. What that is really doing is reducing the likelihood that farm records would be released in response to the Freedom of Information Act requests submitted to FDA should they obtain or copy farm records. So you'll notice that at the bottom of a lot of templates. So if you want to go ahead and scroll down, Nathan, if you continue on through this document, you'll see all of the templates that we've referred to throughout this, throughout the beginning of the document here. And so this is all in PDF form, but there are Microsoft Word versions of these templates as well on the Produce Safety Alliance website that's at the bottom of this document, and then also on the safeproducein.com website. On the resources tab, we also have a link to these Microsoft Word versions. Like we said earlier, if you start, tailoring those to your farm, just be careful that you don't take off information that is required by the FSMA produce safety rule.
Okay, great, Tari. Thanks. I know this feels like a really quick talk, but it's actually been 30 minutes and there's a lot of information in this PDF. I suggested everyone take a look at it because it is your kind of your holy grail for what's required. And please check out the links in the description for more information, and don't hesitate to contact myself or Tari at Safe Produce because everyone's working hard to keep Indiana safe. Thank you everyone so much.
Thanks.